to the species that is past its course and more, and someday discover we don't need to kill each other anymore. We're gonna give all that over to some story, then forget to live. Should I know that stop exploring? Are we gonna lose the ability to keep dreaming about what the future has in store and rest our heads between our legs, staring blindly at the flow, 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 flow. Nobody knows, say that nobody knows, nobody, because reality is colder than what we believe. Nobody knows, even if somebody knows, nobody. Let's get up on roses, the end of the world on a movie screen, the end of the world on a movie screen, the end of the world on a movie screen, the end of the world on a movie screen. Movie screen. Could this be the end, or is it the beginning of the world being and you are lucid dreaming? Is life losing no one in attempt to control it because we're afraid to be who it is we are and lose the little me inside that longs to be a rock star? Say that nobody knows, nobody, because reality is cooler than what we believe. Nobody knows, even if somebody knows, nobody. Let's get up on roses, the end of the world's on a movie screen. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Violence and denying what's inside us, and the end of all the lying that is only led to crying. Yes, this could be the end of judging everyone and who they're fucking. Yes, this could be the end of suffering because we believe all our assumptions. This could be the end of ignorance and the end of chasing eternal bliss. Could be the end of governments and not being able to pay the rent. Could be the end of separation, the source of all our frustration. Could be the end of world religions and jealous gods are always sinning. Could be the end of the universe where our souls just hooks without a verse. Could be the end of all our fear. This being the radiance of fear. Yeah. Nobody knows, say that nobody knows, nobody, nobody knows, nobody, nobody, nobody knows, even if somebody knows, nobody. Una vida, vida, you, na una vida, vida, you. Nobody knows, say that nobody knows, nobody, because reality is colder than what we believe. Nobody knows, even if somebody knows, nobody. Let's get up on roses, the end of the world's on a movie screen. Let's get up on roses, the end of the world's on a movie screen. The end of the world, the end of the world, the end of the world.
That was Ash Ruiz with The Source of All War. This is Suzanne Toro with Time Monk Radio, and I would like to thank you all for joining us today. We have special guest Clif High. We are sharing a conversation that we had prior to him making his most recent announcement about the plans for our global population. The reason I called the interview is because I actually knew and have sensed for most of my life that we would be coming to this point in time. Now, what I wanted to do today was, one, prepare everyone for passage by showing all of you one man's ability to harmonize with universe, uphold his commitment to why he is here, and three, to allow all of you to understand that we have the opportunity in every moment to shift our outcome. I hope that all of you will take the time to sit and contemplate our words, Clif's wisdoms, and at the end I will share with all of you how I have arrived at understanding this information, as there is some importance to that, only to give you perspective and understand that we have full potential in this moment to create a tilt if we all do so choose. For now, let's just sit back, relax, and enjoy our conversation with Clif High. The intent, Clif, is just to help, because honestly what I'm perceiving is a huge transition on many levels, and I think your wisdom to help kind of translate that for the listeners, the people that are really impacted by your words and your wisdom, will be really beneficial right now. Will help with that tilt, as you described.
Yeah.
We'll see what we can conjure up here. All right, so we'll just dive in. Clif, are you there?
Sure. All ready to...
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us today and this beautiful, I guess you're having a spring February day and I'm having a summer February day.
Yeah, we're about 2 months early for this kind of weather. It's traditional that we have a good day around the 1st or 2nd of April. Sometimes if we have one of those late Easter years, it extends out into there, but this is very atypical. I'll take it. Not complaining. It's just glorious. I'm able to get a lot of work done.
Nice. Yeah, because you had a big snow a little while ago, too.
Yeah, and we found one out of the many joints in the new grow dome that had separated under the snow load, but was in no danger of giving way, but 2 of the screws had sheared loose. But because of the way in which the joint was engineered, the compacting of the snow on it just sort of held it there until we could get around to fix it. Very nice, yeah.
Well, that's
and
good.
I've got to say that it was totally unexpected that we would get that level of snow. I knew that we would have legendary snow for us, but we broke all kinds of records in an extremely short period of time. So it rather shocked the violent swings between 2 feet of snow, which is atypical for us.
Right.
We may accumulate 2 feet over, I don't know, many weeks of a storm after storm, but not usual to get it dumped on us like that. And then it was covered with ice. And then we had wind after that, which knocked down trees. I've got, probably 120 branches down that are 30 feet or longer. It took us about 4 hours just to shift the backyard load over to the area where we're going to use to saw them up. And then I've got tops of trees that are about 15, 18 feet high, the tops are, and those have sheared off, and those were multiple tops on fir trees, which is not a good thing, and they existed since 1996 when we had an ice storm, and they broke off then, and then new tops form. So they've had that level of growth, and here we've got this just extraordinary level of weather. It wasn't the snow so much, it wasn't the ice or the rain or the wind that followed, it was the accumulation of it all that damaged thousands and thousands of trees in southwestern Washington. Perhaps on the order of millions of trees were damaged.
Wow. And before that, I mean, did it feel, because you're connected to nature so nicely, did you feel like it was a natural course of events or a little mixed? Or
I don't think it's it might have been augmented, if that's what you're talking about. I do not believe that the weather at this level at the moment is showing patterns that show scalar inducement. Once it's going, it's awful hard to tell. Once you've got the hurricane, it's easy to steer, and you leave less tracks as a scalar driver of the hurricane. But trying to use scalar weapons to induce the hurricane, you're going to leave a huge level of, if you will, electromagnetic debris about for people to see because of what would be required. And you actually could, by the way, I know of a method where you could use a scalar thing like HARP and one other simultaneously, and you could actually engineer a hurricane. But the storms we're having now, I'm actually putting down to a natural process. The natural process goes back to the Bott cave, Dr. Bott's understanding, which is actually a variant of what Nassim Haramein discusses. Now, Nassim Haramein uses a heliocentric model, but Dr. Bott and myself assume that we're just in the tail of the coma and we can't tell the difference of the sun, the coma of the sun. Right. But basically what I think has occurred is that if you imagine, and in fact just today we had a confirmation from some scientists that they're out looking at extrastellar space just beyond our solar system, and they're saying basically, what the hell's this stuff? And it's not at all what they expected. And that goes along with Dr. Bott's thinking on this. And here's basically the idea of what goes on. If you think of a comet, just imagine it traveling horizontally across your field of vision in a reasonably slow fashion. You would see the coma of the comet would form a particular angle as it stretched out behind the comet. Now, it would also have an angular tail that would shade down or feather down until it sort of disappeared. It would not be cut off abruptly. It would sort of dematerialize slowly, and the edges would eventually feather down. But from our perspective, it would be a diminishing angle, and so it looks in a vague fashion, sort of a diamond shape, with the shoulder of the diamond would be perpendicular to the parallel of the horizontal that we're looking at. Now, the way to think about this is that our orbit doesn't change, and our angle or tilt doesn't change, and thus we don't have a crustal shift or anything like that. But what does happen is that the shoulder size of the coma of the sun widens and shrinks over time. And it does this in proportion to the extrasolar space and the material out there that it encounters. Because in a sense, the sun is not in a vacuum. Right. It is pushing its way through the dark matter that scientists can't see, and that causes the friction that causes the heat of the sun and forms the coma. And over time, it encounters clumps of the dark matter that are probably more material than other times, and we're in one of those at the moment. And so the coma behind the sun is contracting. And there's a couple of really interesting dynamics that go along with this. Curiously, or not so curiously, our biggest, fattest planets in our solar system are at the widest part of the coma. Because and so it may be that our planets, the small one, Mercury, and then the next size up, Venus, and the next size up, Earth, and then the next size up, Mars. Mars is atypically small. But we're all lined up in this harmonic that is basically relative to the space allocated to us at that particular transverse section of the cone of the coma. So if the coma is contracted, that is to say squeezed in at the shoulder and all the way through, Earth is going to have less space, and we may see that our year shortens. Simply because there will be less distance for us to travel this theoretic orbit. And so we may get to a 360-day year. But some really interesting things occur as a result of thinking about this. If this is what's going on, then our tilt towards the sun doesn't change. Nonetheless, though, this accounts for why my friends up in the First Nations territory near the Arctic Circle are seeing the sun 6 and 8 days earlier than they should. It's also accounting for why I'm seeing it at a higher angle using my solar observatory here this particular time of the year. It's actually at an angle that is much more representative of what we should be seeing in March. And it's way early. And so if this is the case, then all kinds of great changes are upon us. And it may indeed be that this is also why we had all that earth groaning.
Right. And with that, then for the solar blast that we had just this last week, did you see the videos of the one spot?
No, I haven't. I'm just still trying to catch up on so much stuff.
Did you feel the blasts?
Actually, we did, because of the damage, and it was a weird pattern of storms. Very, very strange indeed.
I'm curious because it's almost, myself, I felt impacted, and many other people too. And then I go back to one of your reports when you talk about people all of a sudden dazed or, drooling. Did in this next sequence of data, as I was going through it, do you feel that the sun is going to be impacting us even more or amplifying based on what has come through on the data so far?
I wouldn't think amplifying. It is a lens in that sense. And so basically what's going on is that it's encountering turbulence, or in a broad sense, in its passage through its environment. And it's lensing in some of those effects to us, to the entire solar system, as a result of what it's going through. We've had the Russians since late 80s. Sometime in the late 80s, the Russians said, hey, the heliosphere is changing. It's getting really odd, and it looks like we're entering an interstellar dust cloud. And a lot of the Western scientists said, oh, no, you're crazy. Can't be such a thing. But it's not a dust cloud so much. They were just measuring effects and hypothesizing, as it is this difference in medium density, if you will. The it's thicker water that or whatever that the sun's got to swim through, and so the impact on us is going to be more getting through its lens than has in the past. Now, the amplification component of that, it's good from our viewpoint. It's going to ramp up, I'm certain. I don't know that we'll see it as a magnification of our regular screwiness so much as just a step off the sidewalk into a whole new kind of screwiness, as we're seeing with the sudden Tourette's syndrome, and there was an outbreak of in China that was reported of violent itching that swept through basically what we would think of as a county, several 100,000 in population, and they just had no accounting for it, and they put it down to a temporary unknown cause mass psychoses, and they treated everybody with tranquilizers just so they wouldn't be scratching. But nobody knows what the cause was. But the thing is that no one outside of an actually relatively tightly focused area was affected, and no one going into the area after the fact was affected. It seemed to be transitory, whatever it was that caused it. And so I think we'll be seeing a lot more of that.
And what would you attribute that to? I mean, could it be solar, and
Correct.
that's just a vortex in the land right then and there versus...
And look, we've got all these people that are, not crazy, or they may be crazy, let me put it that way. I don't know. I'm not going to validate their mental state. But a lot of the people in the woo-woo world are quite convinced that the granite and the stones and the cement and other things in pyramids and this kind of thing focus energies. And I am quite convinced that the ceramics and the quartz and so on involved provides a scientific basis from which you can hypothesize that with some effectiveness. So I suspect that such things as bowls in the earth formed by granite hills around a granite valley, that kind of thing will indeed concentrate the effects, or maybe even limit it. We just, in some areas you may find that prevents it from coming through. We just won't know. We do know that there appears to be a 36 to 56,000 year cycle. There's a lot of weird archaeological things that are acyclical relative to the precession. That is to say, it can be easily seen that they're cyclical, but the cycle does not in any way line up with the precession of the equinox. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people have tended to either ignore it or put it in as a half cycle or a quarter cycle or something like this, and it is because we've been blinded by the obvious, which is the precession of the Earth's tilt relative to the zodiac producing the precession of the equinoxes, which is this really cool astronomical thing that we've been sort of unable to even consider the idea of this periodic expansion and shrinking of the shoulder of the coma around the sun. If we were to allow that had a period of its own, we can plot certain periods relative to things like ice ages and movements of humans en masse in a diaspora way, but also movements of humans relative to vertical. In other words, there's a time on the planet when we can say, it's very curious, but everybody in Turkey and in Central America, Southwest America, northeastern South America, big parts of northern Africa, were all living underground at the same time 40,000 years ago. And it's like, why is this? And then we see that the same people that had been living in caves about several hundred yards deep in any event, that were surface level caves in Utah less than 300 years later, were living in caves that were several hundred feet up a near vertical cliff face, and they only had 12 and 15 feet of steps to get into them. So the hypothesis is that there was suddenly an inland sea, and all these people that used to live in caves at the bottom of the cliff were now living at caves that were about halfway up and getting there by virtue of canoes or some other boats. Of course, historically, boats are discarded because, in terms of archaeological evidence, because they don't survive. It's not like stone records and so on. So we just really can't say explicitly how people were getting about, but if we don't take those into account, there's all kinds of strange things like, how did these people get in and out of that cave 150 feet up this hillside?
Right.
But it's very easily explained. But then you get into the question of, well, what are these giant jutty things that come out of the back of the Giza pyramid? Well, they're actually piers. And if you look at them, they have bow and stern ropes for sizable boats. So I wonder if indeed those boats weren't bringing ferrocement components to be mixed up on site to be made into the pyramid. And that makes the most sense given the construction and the lack of ramps and so on and so forth, and also the type of stone that we seem to have there. So a lot of these weird cycles suggest that if we were to look at as I say, about a 36,000 to 56,000 year cycle, there is some variance in there, but that really does map up with ice ages, with minimums, with solar maximum events, with humans going underground, with mass migrations. And hey, guys, we're in one of those periods right now.
Yeah, epic. So as I'm drawing it, I'm drawing us like kind of going along our perceived linear path, spiral linear path, and then these spikes. Could those be attributed? Never mind the monkey mind logistics of how that would be as quantum leaps?
In human evolution?
Well, just if you have these spikes and where people migrate at mass migrations, because I'll just refer to the Hopi, they go back to the Earth, and they always talk of the worlds emerging, and their deity or whatever, Masa'u, would come and actually place quote-unquote a footprint, and they would break the pottery, and then the migration would begin to the next world. And they would talk about the metaphorical reeds. They actually came up on reeds out of the earth to the next place. So thinking that you're in a lower cave and you have to make it up 150 feet, you would move through reeds. But I'm just kind of curious, is this...
Well, but there's also, for the Hopi, the reed, by the way, is also the name for the reed boat. It's the same word that is in Egyptian for that same boat. I'm sure you've seen them, the big reed boats that are all bound together, right, like in Lake Titicaca?
Yep.
Okay, so it well could be that these people indeed are referring to that and they don't know it.
I mean, because that would be like sudden influx of water.
Yeah, but here's what we've got. We've got an issue where we've got expansion of the planet, and we know that the continents themselves are the oldest part of the planet, and the seabed is the youngest part of the planet. And the seabed has all these tears in it, and the seafloor rips open. We also know that there's a fluctuation in sea levels that would have nearly 700 feet variance over time. And at the same time, there's a fluctuation that's 11,000 feet if we go to places like Lake Titicaca. However, there's another explanation now for why all of the sea material at that height. And we can leave that out at the moment. We can leave out the extraordinarily high mountains and why they have ocean material on them. Because basically they have ocean material on them because they were there as a smaller mountain when the Earth was a lot smaller and there was enough water to cover everything.
Right.
But the Earth is larger now, it's torn, and so the oceans have torn and have gone and fallen into the tears in the skin of the Earth. And over time they would become lower, and so they become massively lower as the Earth has gotten larger. But now there's also another effect in there, and that is that the Earth creates water, and it creates water abiotically the same way it creates oil. The entirely the same process but it creates water in fantastically larger quantities than it creates oil, and we know it creates a lot of oil. So there's water infusions as well. If you look at all of the deep water hot vents, you'll see that many of them do not have feeder zones. So the water's coming up from an even deeper source. In any event, so the expectation is from actually, if we go back and we even look at Graham Hancock's work with Underworld, where he discusses the disappearance of the civilizations off of Japan and off the coast of India, we see some evidence of that off of the Caribbean as well, but we see no evidence of it at all on any of the western edges of the continents. And there's a reason for that relative to the expansion, because that's where we expand, and it tears and shifts to the east that way. So But if we look at all of those cycles, then we're at one of those cycles where
Right.
we can expect the double dose, where we can expect a sudden creation of a lot of water and maybe almost simultaneously another large rupture
Right.
and another great tear.
Feels that way. In that moment in time when that occurs, these, like in the Grand Canyon, it's been filled with water, they say, at least 9 times out of how many ever billion years. Well, it's been here as long as the Earth has, but it's changed and metamorphosed over the time, and there's been migration even in that. If we have this influx coming in, then this gets into this kind of multidimensional conversation, because we might be at this moment in time, and we won't know until we go through it, that we are facing potentially a mass extinction on this planet. And I'll say that, and you don't have
No,
to
no,
confirm it.
we actually know we are in a mass extinction event. The only thing in doubt is which species are going to go. But we know already that we've crossed the boundary into the 6th largest mass extinction event on record. But
Okay.
the question, and really, I suppose, in everybody's mind is, are humans going to get it?
Well, we're not any more special than anything else on this planet. And
That's
definitely.
not true. That's not true. And see, that's what is at the core of the weird thinking that is religious and very deeply spiritual that you get from people like Tesla and Fuller, Buckminster Fuller, and what was the guy's name? Maxwell.
Right.
Okay, they all had this, in spite of the fact that they approached it from a mathematic viewpoint, they all had this almost magical view that indeed we are special. We are more special than apple trees. We're more special than earthworms. We're more special than, dogs or fish or anything on the planet. We are more special than dolphins, but marginally so, and we're more special than the other cetaceans, more so. The reason that we're more special is because we are able to create complexity at a level that is unsurpassed, and that is what universe favors. And it can be demonstrated that that's the case relatively easily. That at one level there's an operating paradigm in the materium to continually push the complexity boundary, and we see it. Basically, it's no accident that we even come up with the idea of evolution, because that's the operating paradigm, and the operating paradigm is ever more complex, ever faster, ever more complex, ever faster. And it's a self-fulfilling kind of a thing, and we're about to approach basically what Terence McKenna described as the transcendental object at the end of time, which is the ultimate level of complexity feeding on itself. And I actually think this is probably a really good place to discuss this. I have noodled on this and have been gnawing on it for a number of years, and I think that you can make the argument that there is a threshold level of complexity that, once it is reached, starts folding on itself in orders of magnitude. And basically what I'm saying is that once you get a certain amount of complexity going, it reaches a point where it becomes a standing wave of complexity that no, that's not really the way to explain it. Let me see if I can do this appropriately. Every 22 trillion times a second, the universe sends out a pulse, which creates everything. 22 trillion times a second, a pause is shot out through universe that destroys everything so that we can have motion. The next time that pulse comes, we're able to move because we don't exist as atoms in the previous position. And as a result of this pause and pulse and pause approach, we have a wave that is created as the pulse goes through the universe, and it goes instantaneously fast because it doesn't care about time or space, and it ricochets off the end of the materium, the universe, at the far end, and comes rushing back to collide with itself. And when it collides with itself, that's actually what I call a mote. And that first mote becomes ever more complex because the wave goes to the other side of the universe, comes back and collides with itself, but it also collides with the mote of itself, colliding with itself, and so it goes from duality to sort of a triple and starts going up in exponential into Fibonacci numbers. This is really where mathematics comes from, is the harmonics that are at the base level of the vibrations of all of the universe. And so here we are at a level of complexity. And let's say that we want to put this in terms of John Calliman and his view of those various steps through evolutionary complexity, where we start off as inorganic, and then go to cellular, and then we go to being level, and then family, and then organizations that are greater than that in the form of social structures that are nations, and so on. And we get up to the point where we start thinking about nation level, and then planetary level, and then solar system level, and then what we can think of as galactic level. And then in his view, he said universal level. And I don't think we're at universal level. I think that what's going to occur here is that the complexity that we've created now, which I think everybody would agree that's as old as I am, is that the complexity has at least doubled, if not gotten greater in the last 5 decades, doubled or greater. But I think we're going to approach a point where the complexity will crash on itself in such a way that we will truly go galactic. And so let's imagine this right now. We're all on this little tiny rock, the third rock from the sun. We've got 7 billion of us on this planet. I don't know how many hundreds of billions of trees and fishes and everything else, but just think of the 7 billion humans here. Okay, now, what if tomorrow we were faced with everybody suddenly had a payphone, or the opportunity to know that a phone existed that would allow us to contact the galaxy. And in the galaxy, there's not 7 billion humans. There are 700 billion planets with billions of humans and other things on each and every one of those planets. And you can see that the complexity has taken off in orders of magnitude that are beyond scalar. It has gotten beyond the ability for the mind at that level to grasp what that level of complexity engenders, right?
Right.
So we are at that threshold now, and this may be the year that we cross it. I think maybe McKenna was prescient beyond a lot of people's understanding with his time wave zero and the way in which he said it relative to the atomic bomb, and the mathematics involved with that, because it brought him to where we are in 2012. And it really feels like we're there this year.
Yeah, it definitely feels like everything's folding in on itself. I would agree.
Yeah, then there's the other thing. Let's assume, by the way, that I'm absolutely wrong about the concept of time travel, and that really could exist, and that all the movies could that with their very so forth could exist. Here's another way that could having to go out into the galaxy, and that would be with a very simple invention, and that invention would be a telephone that would allow us to basically talk to the people at the point at which time travel is invented. And it's an interesting kind of a concept here, because say that 1,000 years from now they invent time travel. And it's really energy expensive. It takes a lot of energy, and they are like us. They're still energy resource constrained, in spite of the fact that they've got free energy and this kind of thing. They just don't want to crank it all up and use it on sending a human back or this sort of a deal. Plus, you may not be able to get them back, so they send us back their version of a cell phone. Well, instantly then, the very first time that we pick up the phone to that person, our reality, and talk to those people 1,000 years out in the future, our reality has changed, even though they didn't travel back, because over the course of the next few years, as all of us get a chance to talk with the people in the future, we find out everything that's going to happen between now and this next 1,000 years. It couldn't be avoided that such leaks would occur, so to speak.
Right.
So the complexity level there, that threshold, I think actually could be palpable. If I'm inaccurate about how time travel works, that would be a very palpable wave, in the sense that I might be sitting here in Olympia, and some doofus in the basement, 7 levels down in Maryland, gets hit on the head by this device coming back from his counterpart in 1,000 years in the future, and he says, "Okay, hey, what's this thing?" And he picks it up, and it's got instructions on it that says, "Okay, doofus, this is what we call a cell phone." push here. And so he talks to him. And from that point on, I think, because of the nature of time itself and the constraint to the materium, I think we would actually all feel something. I don't know if we could describe it as a gravity wave or something, but I think that it would be a palpable, sensible event, much like a lot of people were expecting out of CERN. That if CERN was able to be successful, the people in France and Italy and so on might actually feel gravity waves and so on. It was a concern at the time that they were building their big hole there. But I actually do think that this sort of a complexity wave increase will produce something sensible, and that the reason I'm saying that is because I actually think that it's that accounts for the data gap.
Okay.
You know, the telephone to 1,000 years in the future, or the telephone out into the galaxy confirmed discussion with extraterrestrial puts me out of business. No one will really give a damn about what I do, and I won't even bother doing it anymore because
Right.
there will be too much exciting stuff going on.
Right. Well, but some people, okay, so let's back it up a little bit, but some people are already having some of those experiences, whether they're verifiable may remain to be seen. Then let's talk about the potentiality of anything being possible in any given moment. So even if you're getting a call from someone 1,000 years ahead, the potentiality that you could actually alter the course of events through the mind, the mind's eye, I should say, where that would increase our complexity
Okay, here's
immensely.
yeah, and then there's the other issue. Okay, here's the real problem that I have with time travel. It's never been effectively proven. I know you've got people out there spouting off that, you know, they've. I can understand. I'm not disputing the idea of traveling outside of time and being in point A at one particular second, and then being at point B with no seconds in between
Right.
having transpired. But I'm of the opinion that corporeal time travel cannot exist, because of what I call the complexity barrier. But if the well, geez, I mean, now we're going to get into some stuff that's seriously complex on its own. But basically, there's energy penalties for time travel per se that would suggest that time travel as a component of being able to send a human back and forth cannot happen. But my particular understanding of it has to do with what I call the ever-present now.
Cliff and I were disconnected in the ever present now, and while we reconnected, this is a little sidebar that occurred between he and Fox.
Tourette's thing there could be, look, there's a number of possibilities here. Because of where it's located, you can't discount the idea that it's the military screwing around with one of their beam weapons. But also you can't discount the idea that it's related to the underlying geology, because you guys have a lot of quartz-enhanced, very interesting rock formations there that would tend to... and then from either of those sources or any other source, it makes a lot of sense that they would all exhibit the same kind of symptom if we were dealing with basically the same form of energy disruption, the same disruption to the template of reality. Make sense?
Yeah. I thought maybe it might have been a toroidal outbreak that kind of messed with the human electricity, or, the brain electrical system.
If that's going to be the case, I actually suspect that people will die, because the toroids from the planet, if we look at the petroglyphs, are on the order of multi-story phenomena, electrical phenomena that will dwarf local landscape features. So that kind of we're talking about amperage. It only takes 1/8 of an amp at a particular voltage to stuff the human heart, as we've seen from all the tasers. So it's got to be a very subtle effect, a very subtle level of energy that's causing just that mental disruption. Look at the effects that we saw with actual toroidal outbreak disruption through the rocks in Sicily in those two villages, where the toroid effect was arcing electricity that would send toasters flying off the wall with a 1-inch hole through them.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I was asking Cliff about the Tourette's there because that's just down the road from me, Suzanne. It's not too far at all. We have that. They don't know what it is. It's in Leroy. They have this group of 12 girls that are the original case, and they've developed this tick. This,
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing a
yeah,
flip
they don't
about
know if
it.
it's Tourette's or what. And then they just had a subsequent outbreak again, but if you listen to the quote-unquote doctors here, they said that there would be a subsequent outbreak because of the first one, and it was mass hysteria
Sure,
or
sure.
something. I don't.
I'd be interested to see what would happen if you could get a one of the original people. Are they still suffering from it? And B, if they are, what is the effect of close contact with citrine, the gemstone, the crystal?
Citrine?
Yeah.
Citrine, yeah. It's one of the silicon dioxide. It's one of the more sympathetic resonating crystals with the human body, and also at the brainstem and the lower, what do they call that? The lower quadrant tympanic part of the brain,
Right.
which is where the Tourette's would be centered.
Yeah,
Citrine is an interesting mineral because when irradiated, it turns black, turns into black quartz. And so you can tell the level of radiation in a general area by looking at the degradation of citrine over time. And I've also seen people that have done key experiments with citrine where they can get it to glow after building up the key in their exercises for a few hours or whatever with the citrine in close contact with the body at particular points. Then they'll set it aside and you can go in and see the stuff glowing several hours later and other effects with it. So I know it resonates really easily with the human body.
All right, well, great. Well, thanks for that. Suzanne, I didn't mean to interrupt your call.
You're fine.
Yeah, well, you couldn't hear, so we were just
We were having a moment.
Hey, oh no, he's not a chemtrail. Well, what do you know? Okay.
Oh my. Okay. Well,
You remember?
Yeah. Now, where were we?
we got into such a complexity that they cut us off. The universe cut us off and wanted us to calm down a little bit, I think.
You're talking about time and
I know.
travel.
Yeah, and why we can't have time travel. Although I don't remember why we were talking about why we can't have time.
Yeah, the reason, I guess, to go back a little bit was that if we are in an era of some level of type of planetary extinction, to bring balance was the part of the reason. And then we went into the whole idea that if you had a phone from 1,000 years ahead.
Right, I got you. Right.
Yeah.
The planetary extinction thing is very interesting. You'll get all the, Bill Gates is now big into both depopulation and GMO foods, which are probably the same thing.
Right.
You get some strange bedfellows in that particular line of thinking. But if one looks at it mathematically, 7 billion people on the planet can be housed on the islands of Madagascar, Goa, and Sri Lanka. Not Goa, Sri Lanka. If we allocate 4 square feet to every person, so
fun.
we can all stand on Zen. But the point being, we don't really occupy the planet the way they would have you think. There is not overpopulation. Overpopulation on this planet might easily be 500 billion. Maybe 300 billion is the point of comfort. I don't know. But 7 billion is nothing. It's a question of distribution of resources and how we're organized, not the number that is here. Now, if we go extinct, I'm not putting it down towards an idea of universal balance per se, so much as our particular form is going to be done. And the universe will go on to some other form of complexity. Because we have to look at the evolution of complexity in the solar system and the universe as a whole and our particular role in it, the creation of complexity, if we look at those things that came before us, they are on the order, let's say insects, trees, flowers, birds, fish, most mammals, other than those we've selectively bred, are all fourth order beings. They all look alike. The variance in their DNA is not expressed at the visual level. One cockroach, other than some small variants of the same within the same subspecies looks like any other in that subspecies, and it's a fourth order life form. We're not. We're fifth order, but we may actually, and we're fifth order. We're expressing that extra level of complexity there, where we take our complexity and we don't just merely internalize it with an extra gene here or there. We express it in great profusion in terms of how different we are from everyone else on the planet. And the idea of uniqueness need not exist in universe. Uniqueness need not exist for cedar trees to conquer the planet or that kind of thing. Why it should exist within us must be for a purpose greater than is bound by our local planetary environment. That's my particular way of looking at why we're so really complex and screwed up.
Right. Well, so for like the experiment to see if they could get it right, like it's a game, even the all perceived, powers that they're part of the game too.
Right. And it depends on the various levels you're looking at it, okay? In the materium itself, if you consider the materium as an experimental place, I don't want to call it a game because a game has rules,
right.
and the materium does not. The materium is a place that we explore. Okay, but it's a place for our exploration of ourselves, our karma, of reality, our minds, everything. And so here we are within the materium exploring this. There is a component to us that exists extra materium that ensures survival, and so it's a no-brainer that life survives death. And actually, with an interesting conversation the other day, just as an aside, which will probably never come back again, but I had an interesting conversation with Jay Widener, and we were discussing the various kinds of immortality. And when you think about it, there's like only one kind of immortality. That's the idea that the powers that be have, where they try and keep the Cheney going with artificial, heart and that kind of thing, and keep your body going as long as possible. And the idea to become immortal that way. But there are other kinds of immortality. There's another kind of immortality that makes a lot of sense, and that would be the kind of immortality where you had a body, you were born, you grew old and you died, you had all kinds of cool experiences and had a great life, and you died, just like we all do, and it's no big deal. And then the next time you were born, you remembered everything from the previous life, so you got a jump start on it.
Right.
And so by the 5th or 6th or 8th or 20th time you were born, boy, you would really start to be something. And so that level of immortality, I think, is really spectacular, because it also gives you that level of humility, because you go through the death part. Then there's another variant to that, which I've come up with, which would be the kind of immortality that we have, which is that we're immortal, but we're so stupid we don't remember it.
Right.
So just at that last moment of death, you think all of your life flashes through your in front of your eyes, and all your other previous lives, and you say, "Damn, look what I missed," and I'll pick it up next time.
Exactly. So, I mean, let's go deep.
There's other variants or other kinds of immortality beyond that even.
Right.
So the whole point of us in the materium has to be, you've got to decide at what level do you want to discuss these things. Because all beings in the materium, I don't care if they're out here calling themselves a god, if they're out there being a cedar tree, or if they're a rock, or they're a star, or any of this, they have a component on the outside of the materium that is the same as any of us. And at that level, all consciousness with a small c is the same, and we all contribute to big consciousness with a big C. But our experience of it within materium is radically different. And it is within that experience that I think you get to the point of shibumi, of the sublime, of the ability to graduate yourself from level to level within the materium towards one of those different kinds of immortality, I suspect.
Right. So in some of the ancient, really, it's not really ancient, but we'll call it ancient for this reality, texts, Buddhist texts, they talk about the world systems. We have, and you touched on that when we were getting into complexity, that we have these millions and billions of world systems operating at the same times in complexity, yet we're trapped in one of those billions or millions of systems, who knows, it could be trillions, trying to figure it out. Right?
Yeah, this is actually one of the reasons I think that time travel per se, there are some significant scientific barriers in my mind, and it's just within my mind. I'd be quite open to having the science refuted and examples pointed out to me of where I'm wrong. But there is this concept of the ever-present now, and you touch on it in Buddhism. They're really hot on it there. It's like the big dog of the pack in terms of everything that they discuss. And the idea is that there's somebody out there, 5 trillion light years away, sitting in their living room, in their afternoon, that is having an experience in the same ever-present now that we are at this point. Right. And that level of consciousness spread across the entire level of materium forms the big C consciousness in total. Now, my bitch with time travel is that, okay, in 1850, so-and-so existed. That's fine. But the consciousness that was there in 1850 has moved on. The now, the ever-present now, is no longer there. So I can't go back there because the only part of me that it really exists is consciousness. And so it has to stay with the ever-present now.
Right.
Now, within all of that, you can do some really interesting things. You can have the time bubbles. You can create extra temporal effects. And we can do things like basically foresee the future from psychic impressions as the template is forming just ahead of our ability to see it. Manifest. It's really staggering. There's a saying, I can't think of where, I've seen it in a couple of languages actually, so that's rather odd, and I should one day trace the origination of it. But the saying is, bound by desire, see only the object. Free of desire, see only the mystery. And that's really where we're at this stage. A lot of the people that will be going into some of the mental disruptions in 2012, I think, will be presented with the mystery and won't be able to comprehend it. Comprehend why in that state looking at it,
So if we kind of just, maybe, I don't know the best way to say it, but if we're accepting that we're one complex system amongst many, and that we're here at this epic moment in time, time. I don't know that there is time, Cliff.
I understand. There's only the ever-present now. I understand.
Yeah, so
time is an illusion, and what is it? Lunchtime is doubly so.
Yeah, we're at this now in space with all these other systems operating in their nows. What do you perceive from the data that we could create a tilt, or are we supposed to create a tilt? My perception of what's going on is that we're having energy, like a mass exodus of energy. I don't know any better way to explain it than that, off this planet right now. Whether it's going to universe, I don't know where it's going and what the exchange is for it. But the moon is clearing up. Like, the moon is brighter than I've ever seen it in a long, long time.
We've got Venus doing all of the strange brightening, 300% brighter, and we've got all the stars that are extremely bright, etc. Yeah. Right.
So I don't know if something's actually leaving this system, or in exchange, if there's an exchange process going on.
You could look at it at a physical level and say, well, maybe the thing that's leaving is our atmosphere. Yeah. Everything would brighten up if that were to occur.
Us included.
Us included, yes, correct. Well, there's all this weird stuff going on. There's really interesting things going on with the night vision goggles. There's strange critters showing up I haven't seen before. There's some great UFO still picture that I saw just the other day, yesterday or today, that replicates a very close to what I'm seeing with these night vision goggles, only this thing is in the atmosphere and it's red, and this pilot happened to capture it when he was photographing a lake from up there. I'll see if I can find the link and send it to you, and you can, or maybe I'll just post it on my site. But in any event, there's all different kinds of things going on at the moment energetically, and the human mind is really odd. You go out and you buy yourself a Volvo, and all of a sudden you see that every third person has a Volvo, and you never noticed it before. And it's the ability to get synced to a pattern and then recognize that pattern repeatedly until the mind becomes preoccupied with the novelty of it and says, okay, I'm had it with that, and then you don't see the Volvos anymore, even though you're driving one. And so we have a lot of patterns that we may be distinguishing now that have always existed, but for us, they're new, and it may be that the patterns themselves haven't changed, but it's us that's changed. I'm willing to give credence to the idea that a level of energy can excite or alter our underlying standing wave such that if you wanted to put it into that phrase, the veil would be lifted, and we would have some kind of bicameral brain discussion. In which case, a lot of people are going to be kind of weirded out. They may suddenly think of it as, that they're having a psychotic episode. But as far as the things going on, it's natural. Should we be tilting things? I don't see any reason not to. You get to the point where you're basically an old raspy fart, and you haven't got that many years left, and you say to yourself, it's my planet too, and I'm just not going to take this shit anymore.
Right.
If I want to tilt things a certain way, I may succeed or not, but I certainly have the right to do it. The bastards have the right to do it as well, and they've been successful this far. Now maybe it's the time for me to at least exercise my muscles and my raspiness and say, okay, Mars is out there. I'm feeling the martial oats in me. Let's get our sticks and do a little bit of engagement and try and tilt.
Right.
And it's an interesting time, I think, because of the number of people I've been seeing report sensitivity to the Karyos, and that sensitivity is showing up in all different kinds of symptoms, where people are suddenly getting a little burst of telepathy with their people they live with in ways they hadn't before, or they're suddenly psychic about all the street lights, or getting everything synced up in their lives, and the day flows with just an extraordinary dance-like but yet very precise level of interaction between you and everything else around you in that day, and it is repeated the next day. I mean, everybody has those kind of days periodically, but a lot of people are saying now it's becoming almost habitual, and it has some people, as I say, slightly freaked out.
Right.
Others are afraid it'll go away.
Right. Well, it feels like we're entering into a passage, what I would call of manifestation. I don't know if that's a proper syntax, yet it still feels like we have a passage or a transition to go through. So not knowing what's on the other side of that passage, which you've clearly defined as the beginning part of March, and which has been pointed to coincidentally or not so coincidentally enough by others that I find quite curious. So I think we can kind of feel that we're going to see something significant.
We have so many leading indicators that I'm really sure about the March call. Yes,
Really sure about it too, for many reasons, and because I'm pretty much working in nonstop here mode.
Just on the mundane, the 90-day lead time on things like the Baltic dry index collapsing, a few weeks back, and so on. Certain monetary indicators pointing to a great level of stress that's going to break about that period of time. All different kinds of issues all going on, and then you have the confluence of the silly season as the Republicrats or the Democrats, whoever it is, have their primaries and stuff during that period, and it just builds internationally. There's all these strange events going on, and the Strait of Hormuz is going to be tested at that point with the resolve of the Iranians and all of that horse shit about the potential war. So I think those are certainly coincident and meaningful.
Right. And is it possible that the powers that were, I'm going to call them, did some beautiful justice to us all? Because it's almost like they put everyone through a slow death. So if you've ever experienced watching someone die, you see them reconcile their life and maybe even remember the last time they did it. Because collectively, a lot of people are just tired.
Yeah, I know there is that. I don't know that it's
but it could be a good thing too, though, in the respect that then more possibility opens, the mind opens. There's no clinging to what was, so it's easier to imagine what could be or surrender if we're actually going through a mass populace extinction on this planet, that to make the energy clearer when we leave the planet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's not within my standing wave, so to speak, of complexity to harmonize with that because of the. If you want to look at the indicators, the astrological alignments, I'm very heavily accented towards the Mars energy and the warrior. So
Right.
my approach is very much the approach of Shibumi, the sword in the hand and bleeding yourself out just as you're able to do that last cut. Whether it goes into your enemy or not is not the point, as long as you make it perfectly. So I'll be fighting all the way out. Not going to surrender. I'm sorry.
So you're so
Much,
even if
much
you
more
cross
like.
over, you're going to fight all the way out. Like
Oh,
if
sure. Yeah.
you
In
will.
fact, on the other side, in the Bardo, it's my intent to decide at that point if I'm going to reincarnate, because I know now the progression that you've got to go through in the Bardo.
Right.
No bullshit aside. When my brother went through his death experience, when he died that day, he went into the Bardo and he told me about it. When he came out, he told me about it, and he confirmed that indeed the experience was as we had discussed. And so knowing that ahead of time, it's like, all right, this is fine. I've seen horror movies before, and nothing in the Bardo is going to shock me now. And when you get there, most people are presented with. Everybody should go read this book, The Six Yogas of Naropa. In which the chant of the Tibetan chant of the dying, or whatever they call it, is elucidated for you, and it describes what you're going to face in that period of time immediately after death. Whether you want to put a Christian slant on it or not, and call it limbo and this kind of thing, nonetheless the experience is quantifiably the same. And the images you'll see will have your particular bent on them, but nonetheless you'll be faced with these emotional issues you've got to overcome. And if you look at how the six yogas of Naropa are laid out as a book, you'll see that they describe three emotional phases you've got to go through that are actually very similar to the way in which life is composed of three very large emotional waves you've got to accept. If you were to say that the average person lives through 70 plus years, as all of the text would have it, then you're looking at basically three Saturn passings. And each of the Saturn passings could be looked at as youth,
Right.
advancing into maturity, and then old age. And so you have these same metaphors in the Bardo and this kind of a deal. Now, after you pass and you go on over, the Bardo is the place that you clear all of that out. But if you know what you're doing, you can say, okay, all right, I don't need the assistance. I'm an experienced customer, and I can go through self-checkout.
That will
I
be
know
you,
how,
Cliff.
no problem. Get out of the way. I can swipe that thing.
You want the fast track.
No, it isn't so much as I want the aspect of control, because see, basically, I don't want to spoil the really good book for everybody, so they should really go read that book. It's very thin. It's less than a couple hundred
Yeah.
pages that are really meaningful. But basically, I know where the points of diversion are and where you're supposed to go. After you go through these three emotional phases in the clearing process and getting your karma sorted out as much as you can at that stage, you're presented with this vast hall in which you go and you choose your next life. And if you're unprepared for that, you can make your choice badly. As you see, many people around us have made basically bad choices throughout their lives, yet there was no real reason to. But whenever presented with a good, bad, or indifferent choice, we've all met people that just ended up with bad choices. And it wasn't that they were stupid or anything on an individual moment-by-moment basis. More often than not, it was a pattern that was induced based on a whole life choice, and for whatever reason, they chose that particular life when they incarnated. When you get to the point of choosing the next life, you can also just go beyond that choice and into that next realm. And that's where you get into the discussion in the Buddhist texts about entering into the Buddha fields and deciding if you're going to work out your karma in an incarnation or extracarnate. In that boundary layer that's actually the formation or the actual physical boundary of what we think of as the universe is the materium, and that's where all of these non-spatial realms are that
Right.
the Buddhists called the Buddha fields, and others have described as heaven and limbo, etc.
Right. So you're going straight down the hall and running out. Is that what you're
I'm
planning?
gonna go and open that door and see what's on the other side. I may decide, hey, there's no pie there. I'm turning around, but at least I'm be able to make that choice rather than get trapped in the process along the way.
Right. Well, yeah, there's definitely tricks along the way.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
And that's why when you discuss the materium, it gets so filled with various different levels, and you have to be very clear at the level at which you're going to discuss things. When I was young and very ignorant, I ran into this guy who was a very educated fellow, I realize now. And at the time I was, I don't know, maybe 14 or 15, and this was in Europe. And we had occasion to chat for a couple of hours on this skylift going into Switzerland, one of those cable car things. And he was telling me stuff basically about how life worked. And he's an interesting guy. He was Austrian. And I didn't know enough to ask the really good questions. And it's a question, for me now, it's an understanding of that there are questions about the materium that can be deduced, and then there are some real serious questions that you can only speculate about from the boundary of the materium outward. However, it is quite clear to me now that the game of the materium is not as has been sold to us basically for my entire life and for centuries going back. And it is as though, this is why I get pissed. If it were a natural occurrence, if, for instance, my addiction to cigarettes in my earlier misspent youth were a natural occurrence due to the terribly addictive nature of tobacco, the plant, as opposed to the 117 other addictive chemicals the tobacco chemistry industry put in, then I would not be irritated at those people that were part of the tobacco industry. I would say that they were merely supplying me with the addictive substance that I chose to use. But they enhanced that. They augmented it for a gain. They took advantage. And so they're like the pusher man, right? And they deserve the karmic load that they carry and that they're going to carry into their next life and the lives on and so on. But there's also a the warrior's righteous anger that you get that says, I don't have to accept willingly the idea that I was victimized, and I don't have to be a willing victim of this now that I know. And there's a lot of people that say, closure and that sort of thing, and you're going to want to get at peace with the world and this sort of a deal. And, it even goes to the idea of the deathbed. And at the same time, from my perspective, it's no, I'm part of a continuum. If you've irritated and pissed me off now, wait till I get a chance at you the next time around. Because there are beings that are inimical to the rest of us. And you get at various levels again. Let's think about, for a minute, the samurai in Japan. The word samurai means to serve. The samurai arose and came from these poor guys that were just too stupid to farm, but they knew how to use a sword, and so they could protect the farmer's field, and so the farmer would give them some rice. And eventually they got to the point where they became all powerful as the cycles became extreme. But the various levels in that they developed in the samurai philosophy and understanding of life are not inaccurate relative to our understanding of the material universe as toroids. Some toroids are really nasty, pissy bastards, and they deserve a kick in the toroidal nuts.
Yeah, you're like a Yamatonka.
Yeah, not necessarily gonna alter them, but it'll make me feel better to do it.
Yeah, well, but that's your role. That's part of your role in the universe.
Exactly.
To be that defender beyond just this perceived reality.
And that's why, getting back to it, I can't surrender. And that's why, one of the tenets of, there's actually a lot of things as a male, and especially those males that are involved in martial arts and so on, there's a lot that appeals to, if you were getting into a religion, there's a lot within Islam that appeals to the martial nature of males, and the way in which the religion is structured has a tendency towards discipline, et cetera, et cetera. But it involves one aspect of things that I just can't get beyond, which is surrender to this, third-party being whose nuts I'm going to kick if I ever get a chance.
That's okay. I
Yeah,
understand. Okay, well, putting that not aside, but right here with us.
Exactly so, but the surrender component. So, but basically, my point is that that is indeed a valid and erstwhile approach from many individuals, and that's the way universe made them, and I respect them for it. And I ask that those people that disagree with my viewpoint on this at least respect that that's the way I'm made.
Of course, and we can't we have to recognize that all these energies exist, otherwise you wouldn't be that way. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So with that in mind, wherever we are vibrating at, as we're entering this period, I want to know from Clif High how we can prepare best. I mean, there's one on the the materium side of preparing because we don't know, and keep moving forward because it's not anything until it really happens. It's upon us. But at the same time, knowing that we are at this really amazing passage and we have been tricked. So it's like we basically, whether we did it to ourselves or someone else did it to us, we've been on our own kind of crazy bardo in this 3D reality. And now we're getting to the end of the tunnel and we don't know what we're choosing because we were told a bunch of lies.
That's kind of cool, though. I find that extremely exhilarating. Surprise is and the potential for surprise is the whole point to life. So this part is where the explorer gets his his rush from. What's on the other side of that point? What's on the other side of that ocean? That kind of a deal. So we're right at that cusp. I think this is just the most perfect time to be alive. The way to prepare has nothing to do with putting aside food or any of those sorts of things. Those are all eminently good ideas, food, gold, all of that. You're a fool if you don't own precious metals, that kind of a deal. But for preparing, really the thing to do, I think, is to learn to sense karyos, to learn the differentiation between the flavor of the time and the mechanistic flow of time around you. Because if you do, you'll find that the flavor of the time is teaching us a whole lot at the moment. Just look at the weather changing and as a gross symptom of the changes around us. That's one way to perceive it, but another way to perceive it is to participate with that. In my particular case, I'm doing samyama on the sun and going out and really absorbing it and participating in this change, trying to harmonize with this new relationship of our planet within the coma and us within the planet as a whole. And look at how fitting that is. Here we are. In my mind, which, okay, let's just assume it's all in Cliff's little brain here. It doesn't exist in reality.
I'm your illusion.
But, yes, exactly. My particular religion or delusion, right? And so it's like, respect my religion and I'll respect yours. I won't let you, take it out in public and stuff it down somebody's throat, but I'll at least allow you to carry it around in your pants. But my delusion says at the moment that our Earth is moving within the coma in a major way, and that may be why we've got the Earth groaning and all these other mega changes around us. That change within the coma is coincident in a meaningful way in my mind as well with the changes that are ongoing within the human race. And this is all part of the overall energetic changes that are within our solar system in the greater mass, and how metaphorically perfect, how sublime and very close to the Shibumi state it is that we as humans are here to experience that now. You can almost taste it in the karyos of the time. The way that things are changing around us fast enough that the rate at which we notice them is increasing. And pretty soon the rate at which we notice our noticing it will increase. And it's just going to get absolutely marvelous as we race forward. And then you have to become a shockwave rider. Then you have to have within you an internal sense of center, the hara, the one point of Aikido. The Aikido has 4 basic principles: keep one point, relax completely, extend ki, and all right, I always forget the other one. Oh, keep weight underside. And so you get your center because the world around you will be racing about in its own level of complexity creation as we cross that complexity threshold into basically the breakout of complexity, which gets us back to the idea of here we are fifth order beings, but I'm just willing to bet that right now, while we're in existence, the sixth order is being birthed around us, and we're just too ignorant to see it. We're like the apes that can't see the greater
Right.
civilization around them. And it's just probably nascent and is just developing. But I bet you there's a sixth order being out there creating itself even as we speak. But just even for us fifth order beings, it's just going to be a tremendous rush for I don't know how long. We have some obstacles. We've got some real challenges. But I think that we can, I actually think we're really close to that 3% threshold. Maybe we've even crossed it. And the complexity threshold is going to cooperate with us. There could never have been another time than the year 2012 for us to overthrow the entrenched elite. The reason I call them entrenched elite is because the word entrenched puts them in their proper perspective of, down in their little burrows and their little hidey holes, afraid the rest of us. And they're hanging on for their, look at the nature of the words, right? We don't choose these blindly or without thought. And they are elite because of them. They think themselves elite, not because we make them so. We have made them so in the past, but that's fading, and so we don't capitalize elite anymore. And these entrenched elite are pretty soon going to be, the remnant bastards or something. But in any event, we are at this particular point in time where the Kyrios of the universe has said that it's going to shift our Earth in a physical way that we're all now witnessing with snow on the hills of Rome, magnificent weather here in Washington State, and early summer in California. At the same time that we have all of these other occurrences going on around our planet, and a huge metaphoric shift within the nature of humanity itself, to the point where the people that are pulling the strings of Lady Gaga and the Queen and the CFR and all of those guys are basically about to be deposed, simply because enough of us are going to wake up that one day we'll all just stand there and point our fingers. I thought of a very deadly tactic too, by the way, that would just chill these people down to their copper scented blood, and that would be that if imagine this. Chucky and Camilla, or the Queen and what's his name, get in their car, and they're going to go for a drive, and they're expecting the mobs out there, and they have giant masses of humanity lining all of the roads that they're going to travel, and not a single person says anything. They don't cheer at all. Everybody just stands there, and as they pass, just points a single finger at them and sends that energy, and then drop that finger and let it go, and just go home after that. These people would never be the same after that. That would crush them. Then would they ever go out again?
Yeah,
people
powerful.
think this is screwy, but it's seriously powerful when you have an awakening population, because it's not a statement of, it's not only a statement of Coventry, I'm against you, I'm throwing negative energy at you, I see you as for what you are, but it's also a positive statement saying, I am awake, I see the reality around me, and I'm taking my finger here and jabbing it in the face of the evil bastards that were attempting to twist the reality around me all of these years, and I'm letting them know, game's up, it's over.
Right. And it does feel like game's up, because it feels like everything's, like we talked about earlier, folding in upon ourselves. Do you sense, or even of what you've read through the data, that we are actually, rather than just throwing out the whole idea of time travel, that we're living a multidimensional reality? This will be really mind-blowing. That not only are you and I having a conversation here, but we actually are having another activity in another dimension, maybe not together, but some in another form, or doing another activity at the same time.
That's got to be the case, beyond a shadow of a doubt in my understanding of materium, because greater big C consciousness the subset of which that is associated with my consciousness inside materium is undoubtedly so large that it would be bored just playing with my little tiny bit of consciousness. So it's probably supervising dozens of humans and who knows what others, all over the whole universe. I'm quite sure that that's the case. That we're part of what Vonnegut used to call the grand balloon. Basically we're part of a larger being, and totally unaware of our connection to all these other beings that are also part of that being.
And so, as an Aikidoist, in this moment, we know you have your sword out and you're ready to go.
I actually prefer the wooden stick,
Okay,
the Jo.
stick. Okay.
But I'll use
Excuse me, I'll
the
stand
bow.
corrected. I have used a Tibetan Yamatonka with your sword.
Well, okay, but there's a lot of reasons. Miyamoto Musashi was a great persuader that a wooden stick causes much more damage than a blade.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. So, with your stick, how in that last moment, preparing for the next, all present now, what do you think as a collective? I know it varies for each person, but we are to transport and not transport as an Aikidoist.
The only thing that you can transport, you can in crossing the boundary into the bardo, you can take up to the edge of the bardo. You can take fear. I know this from the number of people that I've had contact with, and I'm not talking hundreds or anything, but several individuals that have died have contacted me after their death, and I've been aware of that and present enough to participate with their contact. And I know that in two of the cases, the individuals had a great deal of fear throughout their lives and carried it right up to the point of death. And I know that fear can be carried to the bardo, but that the process of the bardo, you can't take it with you. So it can influence how you enter the bardo and how you perceive things, but it can't go with you. I know that you do take and you do build with you that barrier of love, so to speak. It's not really a thing you take with you. It's an incorporation of the alteration of the energy of yourself. So in other words, a lot of people get irritated, especially so close to Valentine's Day and all of that. But here's an idea for you. When someone says, I love you, it really doesn't mean much to the individual that is, quote, receiving that, because basically the words you're saying are that I feel good in your presence, which doesn't do a whole lot for me, right? If someone says, I love you, which means that they feel good in my presence, well, that's fine for them, but it doesn't do a whole lot for me, right? So at that level. However,
Right.
If you look at it at a different level and look at the word love, especially as you see its derivation and evolution through both the Latin languages and even into the Cyrillic, you'll find that the word itself goes back to this concept of that is basically the Greeks were really onto it, and they defined love and they sliced and diced in this way and that way and so on, agape, and the ability to unfettered love, unrestricted, and so on. But at its basic core, they said that love was the ability to change yourself. Okay, so this is the way that I think of it, and that is the Lao Tzu think of it, the Lao Tzu way, right? And so I love someone whether they are deserving of that or not. It is the idea of the undeserving love that is, I think, perhaps one of the greatest expressions of that. Because you say that, okay, I love my wife, and it is my goal to express that as honestly as I can for myself. Should she benefit from that, and it echoes back to me, then so much the better for everybody. But at its core, my expression of loving her is really kind of a selfish thing. But it's really also a symptomatic ability to express, or it's an ability to express a symptom of change within me being in the materium and within universe. And I know from my contact with people that have died, that after you die, you can take this expression with you, and it becomes radiant and really damn cool. And that expression of love is that you have within you, deep in your core, in between the Hadara chakra and your heart chakra, you have this ability, the Tantien there, to store this energy, and basically what you're doing when you love someone and you start those vibrations going out and backwards, not only are you participating in engendering complexity, you're making the world ever so much more complex when you run on up and tell someone, "Hey, I love you." That's really going to set things all vibratory everywhere. But the more you do it, the more complexity and so on is supported. It's actually one of the key things in the materium. And the ability to do that is actually a reflection of the ability to change your own energy. And I see people, and I've been observant of people because of the nature of the life I've had to live. As a military brat, the Army drugged my ass everywhere. Every 8 or 9 months, we were moving all over this planet. And I've seen people in all different kinds of cultures. And I've just happened to be fortunate enough to be very observant. And I have observed people that are in this life and have not learned or have not had the karmic grace to be able to express love. And their aura and their presence usually is not very pleasant to be around, and one really wonders where they're headed relative to the bardo and further passages down the line. So it's not only I think that there's actually that the USDA and all these people have it wrong, and at the very top of the minimum daily requirements, it ought to be your love requirement. How many international units of love are you expressing that day? Because if you don't have that, you cannot have health at any real level. And we're at that point right now. If you can actually taste the Kyrios, you can see that people are awakening, and this is all part of that giant cycle, which will inevitably spiral us down in a fractal fashion to the transcendental moment at the end of time, which is probably 8-9 months away. So get our pies. Got to eat your pies this year. Got to get it done this year.
This year, well, and isn't that word, I think, going to change then? So
Yeah.
how are you expressing it if I saying I love you is my selfish act?
It is a selfish act, but at the same time, it becomes it's a weird thing because, like all dualities, it contains within itself its own antecedent, its own antithesis, because as the selfish act of saying that is expressed, it alters you, and you become a loving individual.
Right.
Okay? So at that point, you become if you express the love as well as say it, it is the expression that's important. The saying leads you there, but the expression of it alters you, just the way that artists are altered by their art, and they can't help it. Chihuly has been altered by the visions that he has expressed every bit as much as his inability to express the visions that he sees. In fact, probably in my mind, more so. And so those individuals that are out there expressing love out to the planet are altering themselves continuously for the good.
Right. Well, that's good. Then my former husband was completely accurate in telling me I was completely selfish when I fell in love with everyone.
And that's harmonization with the way you're made. And why should you be censored for it? I understand the nature of how relationships get put together and how there's expectations and the world is compartmentalized. But at some point you have to wake up and, probably on your second or at the end of your first Saturn passage, you woke up and said to yourself, well, I may indeed be that way, and why should I be censured for it?
Right, exactly. So, I overtly love everyone. And so, if we're right now, let's kind of do a run through of what you've seen, what you were able to split out on the report, knowing that we're in this big, huge transition.
We're facing a discontinuity, and I call it a discontinuity because in the past we've had the continuity of a sinusoidal wave of language where we'd have building tension and release tension language. And then it turns out the building tension for at least the last number of cycles has been able to be directly identified with the entrenched elite and their capacity to spin news and control people via the media. The discontinuity that we run into in March is termed discontinuity because there is no continuation of the language cycle. That may mean any number of things beyond our understanding at this point, including its cause. But one thing I'm certain of is that it means the dwindling ability of the entrenched elite to influence us through the media.
And I didn't get to go through all of it. Did any of it indicate that there would be any power outages or complete wipeout of our way?
Oh, sure. We've had that kind of language for a long time.
But in March or later or not, you can't tell.
I can't tell. Our problem is that, this latest report that I released is really an attempt to get around the discontinuity, to get around the huge wave of immediacy language. It is as though, I've used the analogy before of standing on a beach and watching waves approach you with a storm, and then they get so high you can't see the horizon anymore because the horizon is only 8 or 10 miles out there. If you're up on a tall hill, maybe as high as 60 miles. Excuse me. But there's another way to look at this too. If you've ever been on a surfboard or any other small floaty device and you've paddled it yourself, you'll notice you get a bow wave.
Yeah.
And we're actually in a bow wave situation. That's a real good way to look at it. And our bow wave has built up so much that it took a lot of energy to code the changes that allowed me to punch through the immediacy data. And this is one of the reasons I think we're in this mass awakening. Regardless of my distaste for characterizing it as ascension or rapture or anything like that, it is nonetheless going to suggestive to me of some huge level of change at a human consciousness level, because the immediacy language has just been piling up from 2000 onward. It kept growing. We really noticed it in these last few years, and it is growing every bit as in the same pattern as a physical wave, in the sense that being a sailor and before that a surfer and a body surfer and a swimmer, I know how water reacts, and what we're seeing in the way of the immediacy is every bit as much as though we were on a surfboard and we've suddenly powered it beyond our ability to drive through the bow wave, and it's just building up ahead of us to where we can't see beyond that. And so this last report, I used some techniques to eliminate the immediacy data and kept the very far edge of the shorter term and then the longer term, and then I looked backward to see what I could anticipate that was there as a result of the language that showed for 2020. And so the idea was that, well, hey, if the language showed that there were humans out there in 2020 doing this in this region, well, then, I know that humans at least got that far. And they may not be in that region between now and then. They may wander into it over these next years, but at least there would be humans there. And so I came and looked back at it, and it does appear that the discontinuity, indeed, the single largest level of non-monetary associated language is with a solar-induced power outage. Doesn't mean it's going to be accurate, because there's a whole lot of fear around that subject, and that level of fear that's been engendered over these past couple of years has tendency to work its way into our how we're interpreting psychic impressions.
Right. And how much
but
is
I know
maybe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Been imposed on us.
Correct. But I do know that the language itself, in the turn of those 8 days or so, and I can be wrong by 3 days either way, so it could be maybe the last day in February at the very leading edge, and the 15th of March at the very trailing edge. But we really think it's between like the end of the second and through to the beginning of the 10th, and then it changes on the 10th. But that shift in the language could be representing, there's some interesting things about how the shift occurs. There's no large 9/11 kind of an event at all. Because when there was a 9/11 kind of an event, we had a sudden burst of release language as everybody gasped, and we had this burst of building tension, and then as everybody understood what was going on sort of through that day, we had a huge flood of release language. Now, what we've got here is we just turn. We were in building tension language, and we just turn, and we go into release language, and the release language doesn't really drop us into a huge level of release language right away. It scales rapidly upward or downward, depending on how you want to alter the graph, but it's not particularly horrific. We've seen bigger jumps. But what does occur is that it just builds over time with the release language itself scales over time. The summations increase over time without any return to building tension language. And because of that effect, it goes from 216 in terms of a numeric sum at the end of the 10th, the first day of the turning, and then a few days out, we're into the thousands. And then a few months out, we're into 50,000 and crossing into very large levels of release language. Now, does that imply large numbers of humans being in existence? I think so, but I could argue the other way as well, that what humans are left could just be screaming their lungs out, or partying hard or something. It just depends on how you want to view it. I don't particularly perceive the release language as negative. In previous times I don't perceive it as particularly negative this time. It's going to be challenging, but what I think is really cool about it is that we don't go back to building tension, which is in my mind a very good thing, because it implies, or I'm inferring, we'll find out which way reality will have it here by the end of the year, that the entrenched elite are on the way out.
Right. Or in their holes, one or the other. So why wouldn't we all just take a vacation for a couple weeks?
It may be that what we're witnessing, and see, that would be the case if it was a big event, and we all knew that the entrenched elite had surrendered. We all saw them get in their rocket ship and go to self-exile on Saturn. And we'd all say, hooray, okay, time to party, meet you in Jamaica. We can all fit in Jamaica and the Caribbean islands, no worries, We'll tilt the planet a little bit, all of us down there shaking, but, it'll get back to normal later. And so we go party with the Jamaicans for a while, and that would be the case. But this may be a situation that is entirely the quiet, meek inheriting the earth. We may actually be in a situation where on that particular day, that last person reads that first article that puts them on the Enlightenment trail, and that last person was the critical mass threshold that had to be reached before the cascade would start, and it starts with that last person reaching that threshold. And so for the rest of us, there's nothing that changes. The market seems to react fine that day, and the news is seemingly the same that day, and then it just starts scaling out of control as the Enlightenment or Awakening revolution proceeds past the critical mass. Now, let's examine what I mean by this so that we can be really clear about this. And all of us that are old farts, we understand exactly what I'm talking about, because a lot of us actually lived through it. If you lived through the introduction of the operating systems during the heyday of the personal computer, you saw the early adopters and the visionaries. First, it would be the visionaries. So I was a visionary because I had a K-Pro computer that ran on CPM off of big 2 floppies and had 8K of RAM. But sooner or later, everybody got into computers. And we saw the wave in which that went, and there was a particularly science in defining the wave of adoption of the technology. And in that wave, they had particular areas where they designated the visionaries out there, the people that were really rabid gear sluts and just had to have the thing because it was just so cool. And then behind them came the visionaries who said, oh yeah, it's cool, but hey, I can use that to write and not ever have to use whiteout again. Hooray, I can that much more productive and, alter the world by my writing. And then after after the visionary got hold of it and showed it to the other people, then you had the early adopters. And then after the early adopters got in, they were that much more productive with it all and so on. Then you had this point at which there was a gap. And that was called the crossing of the chasm, or the chasm, by the technicians that were analyzing the adoption of technology within the social media. And there was a gap between the early adopters and the infiltration of that particular theme into mainstream. Now, I maintain that the edge of that there really was no gap, that what actually had to occur was that you never had to cross the chasm per se, that what that was a time delay as the early adopter mass of the pyramid had to grow to a particular size, reaching a critical, crossing a critical threshold, and then the rest of there was a sufficient mass to then populate in a ladder diagram fashion throughout mainstream very rapidly. And so we saw the guys in the early days of the computers out there camping in front of the Apple store, or camping in front of, the store to get their Windows 3.1, and they'd camp all night and grab it and run home with their stack of 42 floppy disks to load their new operating system, laughing gleefully, and everybody around them would say, basically, what the hell? But sooner or later, those other people saying, what the hell, were also using computers, and we're computer aficionados. Now we're at that situation where we've had the computers take us up to the internet, which took us into connectivity, which we've gone into now the next level of technology, which is ephemeral, which is virtual, and that is the meme. And now we've had people like David Icke who've been out there laboring as the very early visionaries who had the vision, that have been out there propagating the vision, as with Terence McKenna and dozens and dozens and dozens of woo-woo people. And we're at that point where we've gone through the visionaries, and now we've gone through the early adopters, and we're in that last ranks of the early adopters getting it. And so some kid out there, probably 16, 18, 20, or 80, is going to read this article, and then that last person is that last person that's required for the critical threshold. They'll tell someone at the same time that everybody else is telling someone, and it'll just go psh, in what's known as a ladder fashion. And ladder diagrams, if you go and look them up online, are the way in which disease spreads through an orchard, for instance. And you get it in one tree, and it's there for a while, and there's just no real progression of it. And then it's in 2 or 3 trees, and then the next thing you know, it's in virtually all trees, and you've got a real problem. And so now the entrenched elite, it's in all the trees, and they've got a real problem. I think we're going to reach that threshold in those 8 or 10 days. We'll cross it, and it will build. And by the time we get to June, we'll see if I'm inferring or the universe is implying a big change.
Right. And so within that could be quote unquote a perceived quantum leap, or it could be Control Alt Delete and a new program loaded.
No, I think it's biological. So I wouldn't accept a mechanistic reboot analogy, because of the nature of the technology is mechanistic. It has forced us to think that way, and we've used language that way amongst ourselves. But I don't like to let it alter my thinking from the organic approach.
Right.
So my level of thinking is much more like we've had our main trunk growth, we've had our shoots, and all the woo-woo guys are the buds, and now we're about to leaf out.
Okay, perfect. Well, and that might be for the one techie that's the guy that's going to tip us over. we might need both analogies.
There you go.
So with that, let's just play with the imagination a little bit, and that occurs in that 8 days. Then is it possible that even the stuff that is coming out, on this the future recent history, that all of a sudden at that point that might totally shift based on our perception of our reality and our place in the universe?
I'm certain that that's the case. I'm also certain it would be unpredictable, just as to a great degree it is unpredictable the events of that single individual lighting the match, setting themselves on fire in the square, had unpredictable results, even if that individual was a Manchurian candidate. You believe the CIA engineered it such that that individual would set themselves on fire. It's the old situation that you've got to, everybody needs to understand that complexity brings with it unpredictability at a level that is going to escalate. And that's really the whole core of conservatism, if you've ever really thought about it, the fear of unpredictability. The whole thing about conservatives, and the reason that the whole conservative movement around the planet, and no matter what name you put on it, is going to pass this year, is that we're going to get to a level of complexity where it will become undeniable that we're in complexity, and we'll never, ever, ever be able to go back to anything even close to the simplicity that existed yesterday, let alone the ancient days of the 1950s or whenever these people think the heyday of America was, or the heyday of the Ukraine or Germany or wherever, right? And so conservatism as a philosophy is not about conserving the now for the next generation. It is misnamed. It is about a deliberate, and if you look at their language, attempt to return to a, quote, simpler time and understanding of things, and that's passing. And so the people that are within that movement are now going to be faced with a challenge to pass with that movement, or allow that movement to pass from them and join into the complexity and get on with the unfolding of reality around them.
And so was that their strategic plan in basically disseminating most indigenous tribes because they understood the complexity of the universe?
Correct. Because they did not exist in a mechanistic world that could be defined, but existed in a world that was much more ephemeral and much more vibratory, rather than the discrete tuning, if you will, that the digital world puts on you, the boxes it puts around you. No, I don't really want to go to 106. I want to go to 106.594, and if you don't allow that 594, you're dealing with with an entirely different view of reality, and you're taking it away. And the indigenous tribes, especially the shamanic-based tribal cultures, deal with the reality that exists, the vibratory reality around us. Imagine, and here's another weird idea that could pop up in our shift, and as part of the shift into release language. What if everybody around us suddenly could perceive infrared or ultraviolet, and we saw that there were beings that inhabited the same space as us, that were non-material insofar as we could think of. We could put our hands right through them, and they could put their hands right through us, but nonetheless they were there at a vibratory level that we could suddenly see.
Right.
That would alter a lot of behavior. Oh boy, better not be doing that. All these people are watching you. These things, whatever, right?
There's so much truth in what you just said. It's hilarious. Okay.
It is. It's funny, and that could be and that would be an overwhelming mind change that would ripple through the society very rapidly as soon as it was proven to you at an individual level. You would never, ever, ever think again the same way.
Right.
And that would alter reality forever. Am I going to give a rat's ass what the Bernanke or the Obama think about anything after I've seen that my trees outside are actually housing demons in the infrared, or whatever we want to call them, these great horned beasts?
Right. Well, and there's truth in that statement, both of those statements. If people have taken some journeys, they see those different realities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the shamanic people had methods for coping and allowing that reality to exist, that the mechanistic world not only isolated, but went to a great deal of trouble to ridicule. And to put down with ridicule constantly, because ridicule is the largest weapon they have. You'll note that they used it with great effect on the UFOs. And prior to that, they would ridicule and drive to drink and drugs and self-destruction any indigenous population that had anything remotely approaching a psychedelic shamanic tradition, because it allowed you. When you take those drugs, it allows you to see the vibrations at different levels that actually exist, and so you see the reality around you. You become less aggressive, in spite of the fact that I'm a mean, rotten, raspy bastard. I'm far less aggressive now as a result of taking psychedelic drugs than I would have been otherwise. And presumably, if I'd taken enough to become a full-fledged shaman and not gone the warrior path, I would become totally nonviolent, because that's where it leads you in an understanding of reality around you. Why should I mess with this little vibration? It's very much a situation of an understanding of the appreciation of energy, and you're putting the energy out. When you can actually see the changes in aura of people around you and your own, and you know that you're expressing energy or expressing love in that sense, as you put it out, then, and you see that your body is physically composed of that, then the last thing you really want to do is to damage your body by impacting another person negatively, because it's very much the Buddhist understanding of, hatred or anger is a hot coal burning in your hand. You need to get rid of it, but no person would willingly take it from you.
Right.
And who does it harm,
Yeah. So, and you're still going to go out fighting?
No, I am, because you have to understand
I
that
know. I'm just
No. But at its core, we've got to clear that up. There's this weird duality that everybody can't get their mind around from a Western perspective, because we're used to little boxes as opposed to spheres.
Right.
And if I'm in a sphere, then I crawl out to the edge, I crawl all the way around, I find myself. Just like Bob Marley says, you smoke the herb, it introduces you to yourself, and from that point on in your life, you can have a very interesting conversation. And in the warrior tradition of Masakatsu, or true victory, the truest victory is victory over myself, not any other enemy. Right. And I truly do not wish to harm any other individual. The toroids that I'm going to go out and kick them in the nuts, it's only to get their attention so that I can tell them that they're doing things badly.
I know. I'm just giving you a hard time.
I know. But the problem is that people take the stuff I say very seriously, so I've got to be really careful about clarifying my perspective on it, Yep. Like the whole Bruce Lee thing of expressing yourself honestly, it is the most difficult thing that can be done. Truly the most difficult thing that can be done. And anybody who doubts me on that need only remember back, if you're, back to your trembling adolescent years when you approach someone for fear of rejection, that ability to express yourself to someone with all of those attendant fears, and then think of that, you got to do that your whole damn life. Yes, it's some serious work.
Yes. the inner self work.
So the idea is that you go out fighting, to eliminate from yourself delusion as part of the complete reality school of Taoism, or, the science of yoga, which is actually the science of perception. The idea is that every waking moment and every sleeping moment that you work on yourself to perceive reality as it is actually unfolding around you, and react with it and harmonize with it at that level, and not put those projections on it. And it's really difficult, because the mind is constantly warped by all of the inputs that we have naturally, let alone those bastards out there shoveling it on us with all their devices.
Right, which is pretty amazing.
Right, and the reason I'm so angry about all of this is really enlightened self-interest. I would, as a raspy old bastard with these screwy ideas, I would have a hell of a lot easier life if these people were not out there doing all this mind control crap, making the people around me into sheeple, making it very difficult for me to navigate around them.
Right. No, it's pretty complex system, really.
Yeah.
To navigate, even with what you're doing and otherwise. So if we have this clearing, I don't know what we want to call it, but this shift.
The discontinuity. All I'm saying is, it's a good word, because we're discontinuous.
Yeah.
We don't know what it is, it's just not the same.
Right, yep. And so we have that. If you got to draw the picture, what would you draw?
Froth.
Froth.
I would draw, I'm a boater, okay? And I would draw that strange froth that comes from the ocean sometimes, that is pillowy and soft, and it can surround your boat. You can't sail in it, and the water isn't water anymore at that stage. And it's really if you've never been in it, it's an experience, believe me. And big ships that can get in it, and they can actually find that they can get to the point where they sink. Actually, will lose capacity because as the water starts to froth, it loses its waterness, if you will, and so it's not quite as supportive of them. That's what I've got in my head is this emergence into chaos. Now, I've talked to some astrologers because I like astrologers. They're usually out-of-the-box thinkers. And I've talked to some Vedic astrologers, and I've talked to a couple of the Western guys. And they tell me that this is a very extraordinary year, regardless of what system you're in, and that sometime around the early part of June, we have the great astrological alignment set up for absolute chaos of all different kinds. So that sort of fits with what we've got, although it's a couple of months out. But I can certainly imagine that our situation is that it turns in March, the froth starts to build, and then by June we're all in it.
Yeah, that feels about right.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, what can I say? Yeah, it does. It certainly does. I think a lot of people are feeling it subconsciously as well.
And to
And a
keep,
lot of the real problem is that many of them weren't or have no coping skills for what they're going to be perceiving, and so they're going to be latching it on this and latching it on that. If you have a particular persistent headache and you see one day that there's an earthquake in Sumatra because and you have a headache, and the next day your headache goes away, and 5 days later you get another headache and you think it's the same kind and there's an earthquake somewhere else, you may become go under the impression that your headaches equal pre-saying of an earthquake, which they may indeed or they may not. And it's a universe that's going to decide that, not really any of us. However, I think a lot of people will be making erroneous assumptions on what they're perceiving and tying them to strange things because they have no framework in which to place these new sensations that'll be coming in.
right.
Not only from the sun and everything else, but also from the crashing of the complexity wave around us.
So, yeah, and I witnessed that in this past week many times over around me. But so, sea legs, Mr. Sailor,
Yeah.
tell us how to have our sea legs because we know this is happening. Like this is like a construct of our world system that's going to be happening. But on top of that, we have these other beings that you would like to um, visit and have words
Engage. But
with,
I'd like to engage
engage.
with. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
they're going to be acting up, playing their final cards. How can we best have our sea legs?
It's a question. Well, see, that's a curious reference, okay, because one does not set out as a goal to get them. You can't, as far as I know, teach yourself to get them. There's only one way to get sea legs, and that's to go out on a boat and go through all the stages and puke your guts out, and then one day you're just perfectly fine standing on that deck as it's heaving up and down, and you find it very odd to stand on the solid surface of the dock, and the land makes you want to lie down flat and hold on. But there's the problem. It's not something that can be learned. It's an experience that must be gained. So we're all going to get them whether we like it or not. There's a lot of people that never allow themselves long enough in the process. I think that's really the only thing that you can do is to. Now, I had no choice. I was on a very long voyage, and I threw up for 9 days, and on the 10th day, I was okay, and I had my sea legs. If the boat had docked on the 8th day, would I have gotten them? Probably not. So what we have to do is we have to give ourselves long enough time in the process to say we're going to be okay. It's actually like the psychedelics, right?
Right.
So you take the acid, you eat the mushrooms, they go on down, they hit your stomach, the harmine chemicals neutralize some of the stomach acids, the DMT enters your system, or you get the analog through the LSD through that chemical. It gets into your blood and it hits your brain, and all that starts happening within the digestive process of about 12 minutes. It goes through the first half hour to 45 minutes, and depending on the nature of the chemical, it may start rushing on you in that 45-minute process. Now, when it starts rushing on you, your walls start to dissolve, your heart starts racing, all of a sudden your liver is talking to you in Sanskrit, and your toes are to learn to play the ukulele. And so you're saying to yourself, I'm about to dissolve into all of these constituent parts, and this is going to be a bad trip, and I'm going to freak out. and everybody goes through that stage. And then they would call me when I was on the hotline there for people having bad trips, and I would say, chill. You're not going to actually dissolve. Your toes will never learn to play the ukulele. Yes, your liver is indeed talking to you, but you need to pay any attention to it at the moment, and you will survive this. You have to give yourself long enough in the process.
Yeah.
And at this point, you've got to understand we've eaten the pill. We're talking to the caterpillar sitting on the mushroom, smoking the hookah, and we have to understand that we're in it, so we might as well learn to harmonize with it, and maybe we'll enjoy some of it, but we're not getting out of it. So, as you say, sea legs are going to come by recognizing that we're in the experience and we're here, so adapt to it.
Wow, you just hit the nail on the head, Cliff. We all took our medicine.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes.
And we're down the rabbit hole. Wow, that's a beautiful way to look at it. So we just need our baskets or our buckets if we need to get sick and lay back down and enjoy the ride.
And well, I wouldn't say enjoy. Enjoy those parts of it that you can. It's a challenge. You grow through challenges, so you'll grow through the whole process, and you'll come out the other side a much better individual. And maybe your toes will learn to play the ukulele. I don't know. But at least you'll still be all there as a constituent whole, and you will reassemble yourself. When people would have the bad trips and they'd go through and they would take, adulterated chemicals that weren't well made, or they would have a bad reaction to it because of their own chemistry and so on, frequently the resultant problem that would last for a long time, the weeks of unwellness that would result from that, can be characterized as the process of putting yourself back together. And that's what we're going to all do as we go through this, because it is not discrete. You don't have the trip and then start putting yourself back together as of 9:59 a.m. the next
Right.
morning.
Of course.
It's a process that is ongoing and continuous for decades even after the experience, and you grow continuously. So it's very much like that. It's not totally unpleasant, and you can get a whole lot of work done if you once you learn to harmonize with it. And the universe seems to like that.
Right. Hmm. Well said.
Well, I hope so.
I think
I'm getting a little
so.
bit.
Cliff, I think you hit, like I said, hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
So I thank you for sailing with us today.
Yeah, and actually, Sue, later on in the summer, as the universe turns here, if we get a chance, and I've got the proa out there, if you get on up, we'll take you out on the sound, and you can really get into it and see how it is.
That will be amazing, and I'll bring the pie.
There you go. Cool. Cool.
All
Yeah,
right.
as long as you're coming up through Oregon, grab them huckleberries.
Okay, I will do it.
Okay,
All right,
excellent.
Cliff, you have a beautiful evening.
Okay, and we'll talk to you later.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. That was Clif High with halfpasthuman.com. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. I want to humbly bow to Cliff for having the cojones to release the statement that he released last Monday. While many of us may be experiencing a wide variety of emotions, I want each and every one of us to maybe think about that what Cliff has done is he has released this energy into the universe, welcomed in a counterbalance to a plan that is set in motion, a plan that should have never been welcomed into any of our energetic fields. While it is here and it's facing us potentially in the near future, I encourage each one of you, if you have time and are inspired, to take time over the next few weeks and month to do some deep inner reflection. Ask to be reminded what your cosmic place is in the universe, and welcome in rapid alignment with that vibrational frequency. That will give you many answers and knowing for this next passage. The other reason that I called this interview was to prepare all of us for something that many of us do not afford ourselves to think about, and that is one of the most beautiful transitions that we all will have the opportunity to go through. When we take time to prepare for such a passage, we can do so with a lot less baggage and a very full heart and a still heart. The other thing that I wanted to share that's been shown to me and I feel is the most viable option for all of us in this moment is one, to have conversation with each other, but as also to commune with the earth and the sun and the moon. Take time to commune with any of those or all of them, talking especially if possible to Pachamama, Gaia, Mother Earth, and letting her know that you're finished. You don't want to live in a world like this anymore, that you're ready for whatever you want to imagine. Share your vision, one that's filled with heart space, love. No longer do we need destruction on this planet. She provides us with all the resources we need to heal any dis-ease on this planet, to nourish us and to provide us with clothing and shelter. The powers that were have been utilizing her energy for long enough. It's time that we welcome back our relationship with the earth, the sun, and each other. No matter what is ahead of us, if we start to do that now, I promise that it will return to each and every one of you in the most profound way. I've witnessed it over and over again, the magic that's afforded to each and every one of us in every moment if we take the time to connect to the organic system that supports us in this vast universe. To close tonight, I'm going to share a song by a beautiful gentleman named Random Rab. This song is called Apparently Letting Go Now. He's a being that balances light and dark, and he wrote this song in the middle of a redwood forest. And it took him some surrender to write this song because it was so quiet. His music even sounded loud. If I can do anything for any of you that are wanting or needing to make peace or find a calm place, I'm here to answer any questions or be of service in any way that I can possibly be. The 3 keys in my book are to breathe, welcome in love and share love, and to make peace with self. Until next, this is Suzanne signing out with a deep bow, a soft gaze, and a full heart. Enjoy this song by Random Rab.